The sound that woke me up at 5:47 in the morning was not thunder. It was wood splitting, a hard, violent crack that echoed through my backyard like a gunshot. Then came another one, and another. I was out of bed before I was fully awake, moving on instinct, the way you do when some part of your brain already knows something is wrong. I ran to the back window, pulled the curtain aside, and felt my entire body go cold. My fence was coming down, panel by panel. And the man doing it wasn't some city worker or a contractor or a storm crew. It was my neighbor, Bradley Knox, my HOA's favorite golden boy homeowner. He was standing in my yard with a sledgehammer in both hands, smashing through the cedar privacy fence I paid for, built on my side of the line and maintained for 3 straight years. For a second, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. He swung again, a plank snapped free. Then he stopped, wiped sweat from his forehead, looked straight up at my window, and smiled. That smile told me everything. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a property line misunderstanding. It wasn't one angry moment. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me angry. He wanted me outside. And standing there barefoot in the dark, staring at the hole he had ripped into my backyard, I realized something that made the whole thing worse. Bradley wasn't just destroying my fence. He was trying to bait me into making the first mistake. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the last month expecting exactly this. And by the time he finished taking down my fence, I already had enough evidence to take apart his entire case before he ever filed it. My name is Ethan Cole, and I live in a subdivision outside Raleigh, North Carolina, called Brook Hollow Estates. It's the kind of neighborhood that sells itself on words like charm, privacy, and community standards. Translation: expensive homes, trimmed hedges, and an HOA that thinks matching mailbox colors are a form of civilization. I moved there in 2021 after my divorce, not because I loved the neighborhood, but because I found a decent house with a fenced backyard, a detached shed, and enough distance from my old life to feel like I could breathe again. The fence mattered most. I wanted privacy. I wanted a yard where I didn't have to think about anyone else watching me grill, sit, work, or just exist. For the first year, I got exactly that. Then Bradley Knox moved in next door. Bradley was one of those men who mistake confidence for character. Mid-40s, always in expensive golf shirts, drove a black SUV that never had a speck of dust on it, and talked like every sentence was a networking opportunity. At first, he was polite. Too polite. The first week after moving in, he leaned over the fence while I was staining a planter box and said, "You know, this divider really kills the open feel between the yards." I laughed because I thought he was making conversation. He wasn't. Over the next few weeks, he brought it up repeatedly, said the fence was visually heavy, said it made the property line feel hostile. Once he even said the former owner was more collaborative. That word, collaborative, was Bradley's version of a threat. What he meant was obedient. I told him the fence was on my side, built with HOA approval, and staying where it was. He smiled every time I said no, the kind of smile people use when they've already decided your answer is temporary. The first sign he was planning something came in early April. I came home from work and found 3 small orange survey flags pushed into the grass along the fence line. Not on his side, on mine. I pulled them out immediately and went next door. Bradley answered the door with a drink in his hand like he'd been expecting me. "Those your flags?" "Just checking dimensions," he said casually. "For what?" "Possibly regrading the side yard. Maybe replacing the fence with something cleaner?" I stared at him. "You're not replacing my fence." He gave a small shrug. "Property lines can get messy." "No," I said. "Dishonest people make them messy." That made his smile flatten. The next morning, I called the county records office and pulled my survey. Then I called the original fencing contractor and got copies of the install file, approval packet, and invoice showing exact setback placement. Then I did something Bradley definitely didn't expect. I installed cameras, 2 facing the side yard, 1 toward the rear corner, 1 over the patio with full view of the fence line. Not because I was paranoid, because I've lived long enough to know that people who casually test boundaries don't stop when they meet resistance. They escalate, and Bradley Knox had escalation written all over him. The next move came through the HOA. A violation letter arrived saying my fence may not conform to current lateral boundary consistency recommendations. That phrasing was nonsense, which told me Bradley had helped write it. I called the HOA office and asked exactly what rule I was violating. The manager, who sounded exhausted before I even finished my sentence, admitted there was no active rule violation, just a neighbor concern under review. A neighbor concern. That's HOA language for somebody influential is whining loudly. I sent back the approval documents, survey, and install records. 2 days later, the HOA dropped it. Bradley didn't. He started lingering at the fence line, talking loudly on phone calls about shared boundary corrections. One afternoon, I caught him taking measurements with a laser tool. Another time, I heard him telling a contractor in his yard, "This section's coming out anyway." I documented all of it, saved every clip, every date, every angle. Because by then, I understood the shape of his plan. He wanted to create a dispute, frame the fence as uncertain, then remove part of it, fast enough and confidently enough that he could claim corrective action before I reacted. That kind of strategy works on people who don't document anything. Unfortunately for Bradley, I document everything. The week before he destroyed the fence, he made his biggest mistake. He came to my door. Not angry, not aggressive, just smooth. Too smooth. He stood on my porch with both hands in his pockets and said, "I think we should solve this like adults." That would be new. He smiled past it. The fence has become a point of tension. I'm willing to pay to remove it and put in something more appropriate. It's not your fence. It affects my property. No, Bradley, it blocks your view. For the first time, the pleasant mask slipped. That fence cuts value. It adds privacy. He leaned slightly closer and said, "Not everything behind a fence stays private forever." I felt a chill when he said it, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was worse. It sounded practiced, like he had already decided where this was going. I told him to leave my porch. He did. But before he stepped off, he looked at the side yard and said quietly, "This will come down one way or another." That night, I backed up every camera feed to cloud storage. The next morning, at 5:47 a.m., he started swinging a sledgehammer. By the time I got downstairs and out the back door, he had already torn through 3 full fence panels and 1 support post. "Get out of my yard!" He rested the hammer against his leg and looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're welcome," he said. "I'm fixing an encroachment. It's not on your property. It is according to the revised line." "What revised line?" He actually laughed. That was the moment I knew he thought he had built himself a legal story strong enough to survive this. I took my phone out and started recording. "Step away from my fence." He spread his arms. "Call whoever you want." So I did. Police first, then my attorney, Laura Benton, then the HOA manager. Bradley stayed right there while I made the calls. Like a man's certain performance equals innocence. He even picked the sledgehammer back up once and tapped it against the broken post as if to emphasize how little he cared. But arrogance has a weakness. Arrogant people love being seen. And because of that, they usually give you more than enough rope. By the time officers arrived, I had front camera footage, side yard footage, rear corner footage, live phone video, approval documents, and county survey maps open on my kitchen table. Bradley had 1 printed sheet, a low-resolution boundary exhibit with no county seal, no surveyor stamp, and no recording reference. It looked like something printed from a real estate flyer. The older officer took one look at it and asked, "Who prepared this?" Bradley hesitated. That hesitation was beautiful. A consultant. What consultant? An independent consultant. The officer nodded slowly, which usually means somebody's about to regret improvising. I showed them the actual survey, then the install documents, then the footage of Bradley entering through my side gate with the sledgehammer, then the clip from 2 nights earlier where he stood in his yard, telling someone on speakerphone. Once one section's gone, it becomes a civil correction instead of trespass. The younger officer actually raised his eyebrows at that one. Bradley's face changed for the first time all morning. Just slightly, but enough. Because now he knew his problem wasn't the fence, it was the camera timeline. Laura arrived within the hour. If you've ever seen a bad man realize the other side hired the wrong kind of lawyer for his plan, you know the look. Laura had that effect immediately. She wore dark flats, carried a legal pad, and spoke with the calm precision of someone who didn't waste motion on people she planned to dismantle later. She walked the broken fence line once, asked me 3 questions, asked the officers for the incident number, then looked at Bradley and said, "Did you physically remove these panels yourself?" He made the mistake of answering, "Yes, because they crossed the line." Laura nodded. "Great." That one word hit him harder than if she'd yelled. Great. Because if he admitted doing it, everything else became easier. By noon, she had filed for emergency injunctive relief, property damage, trespass, and interference with quiet enjoyment. She also sent preservation notices to the HOA and Bradley directly. That afternoon, the HOA manager called me, sounding like a man trapped in a burning office. Apparently, Bradley had been telling the board for weeks that the fence was likely non-compliant and that he was working cooperatively toward a correction. He had not told them he intended to demolish it himself. Important detail. Even more important, he had sent the board a PDF titled Boundary Encroachment Support File. Laura got a copy through council demand. Inside were photos, notes, and a measurement summary prepared not by a licensed surveyor, but by Bradley's brother-in-law, a home remodeler from South Carolina. That was the moment I stopped worrying. Because what Bradley had built wasn't a defense, it was comedy. Still, the weeks after the destruction were awful. The hole in the fence changed the whole feeling of the yard. What used to be private felt exposed. I'd look up from the patio and see straight into his yard. At night, motion lights from his house swept across my back door. Once, around 10:30, I saw him standing at the open section with a drink in his hand, just looking into my yard like he was admiring the damage. That was the horror of it. Not just the broken wood, the intention, the certainty that he had the right to change the shape of my home by force. Laura warned me not to engage, so I didn't. I just saved every clip, every stare, every step near the gap, every comment he made to passing neighbors about fixing my property line. Then came discovery, and that was where Bradley's case really died. Because once subpoena power entered the room, people around him started getting nervous. The HOA board turned over email chains, showing Bradley had been pressuring them to classify the fence as a community issue. One board member produced a text where Bradley wrote, "If he won't move it, I'll make the first cut and force the paperwork to catch up." Read that again. Force the paperwork to catch up. That was his whole philosophy. Do the damage first. Invent the justification later. Another witness, a landscaping subcontractor, gave a statement saying Bradley had asked whether broken fence posts could be made to look rotten after removal. That one made Laura smile. "Judges adore fake rot," she told me. The hearing was set 3 weeks later. Bradley showed up in a navy blazer and an expression I think he believed looked composed. It didn't. It looked haunted. Laura went straight for the throat. Certified survey, HOA approval records, install invoice, video footage, texts, his fake consultant map, his admission on body cam, his message about making the first cut. By the time she played the porch camera clip of him saying, "This will come down one way or another," the courtroom felt different, heavier. Even the judge looked tired of him. Bradley's attorney tried calling it an overzealous boundary correction. Laura replied, "With a sledgehammer? At dawn? Through a locked side gate?" That landed exactly the way it should have. Then she used the phrase that ended him. "Your Honor, this was not a property dispute. It was deliberate self-help destruction dressed up as compliance." The judge agreed. The order was brutal. Bradley had to pay for full fence replacement, landscaping repair, attorney's fees, and injunctive restrictions barring any unilateral boundary action. The court also noted his reliance on unlicensed measurements and apparent premeditation in removing approved private property. In plain English, he got wrecked. And the best part was this: I never had to scream, never had to threaten him, never had to swing anything back. He thought destroying my fence would weaken my position. Instead, it gave me everything I needed to destroy his case. The new fence went up a month later. Taller posts, better cedar, steel-reinforced anchors on the side section, stronger than before. The first evening I sat behind it again, the yard felt quiet in a way it hadn't since Bradley moved in. Safe, whole, mine. And sometimes, when I look at that clean fence line in the late afternoon light, I think back to the sound that woke me that morning. Wood cracking in the dark, the smile on his face, the certainty in his eyes. He really believed he was going to win. But some men don't understand that confidence is not the same thing as proof. And in the end, proof is what tears people down. How did you like the story? Subscribe to my YouTube channel.